So the title begs to ask, can a book really ruin a reading experience for a kid in school? And we'll try to answer that at the end of this video.
When people learn that I read pretty often, they start to always go back to I was a reader, but then I read so-and-so book in school. And it makes me upset how sometimes our school system has failed us when it comes to picking books. And it makes me really sad because reading books are an amazing thing. Our school system has not given us the tools to let these books enrich our experience with life and education that make people love literature so much like I do.
But I digress. This is my list of 5 books that ruined reading for me in school. Also, if you disagree with my list, feel free to comment down below. Kindly, let's not have too much hostility in the comments. I know you guys love your books.
Okay, now number 5. To Kill a Mockingbird. I know, we all love this book, including me, but hear me out. I'm sure most of you have read To Kill a Mockingbird, but quick 2-sentence summary if not. It tells a story of a young girl named Scout and her brother Jem as they navigate the issues of race, justice, and morality through their interactions with their father, a lawyer defending a black man falsely accused of rape. I think that Harper Lee does a great job of representing the absolutely heart-crushing realities of anti-black bias in the judicial system during the 1930s, even when all evidence is stacked in Tom Robinson's favor. So just reading over that again, wow, it's a very important book. Me and many others were assigned this book in elementary school when we were afraid of cooties. And then our teachers give us a story about rape and racial injustice, and I know what you're gonna say. They need to be exposed to these topics, and I agree, but I think there are countless YA books that they could identify more with. For instance, I think The Hate U Give would be a better alternative. The Poet X and All American Boys are also better choices. Teachers and curriculum for public schools needs to be more modern and contemporary and sort of up to date with themes and concepts that children can relate to and understand nowadays. As an elementary schooler, which this is actually assigned elementary schoolers or middle schoolers, I just don't think that anyone that young really has the lived experience, especially if you're not a person of color, to grasp the concepts and To Kill a Mockingbird in a meaningful way that would help a child understand the racial injustice that people of color faced in the 30s. I get the argument that there are not a lot of other historical books that are catered to young adult kids though, so if that's your only option for that sort of thing, that's fine, but I still think the previously referenced young adult novels are better alternatives if you couple that with history classes and excerpts from like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Frederick Douglass and other civil rights activists. Also, just for anyone in school, especially those that have lost their love for reading, To Kill a Mockingbird has tough language for a school kid. It's not like an easy casual read for someone who's not accustomed to consistent reading. And I'm not going to linger on this for too long because I think it's a weak argument, but there are words and graphic images in the book that some children may not be able to handle. But like I said earlier, some of these things children do need to be exposed to. Please don't hate me, please. On to number 4. Number 4, The Great Gatsby. Oh boy, I know a lot of people love this book, and unlike many of the others on this list, I straight up just do not like this book. Not only do I think it should not be taught, I just don't think it should be read at all. A waste of time for everyone involved. None of the characters in this book are likable, and I do not think a character has to be good or interesting to be a good character, but they do have to have some redeemable qualities. And they also have to have some sort of a character arc, maybe, some change. None of these characters seem to change throughout the book, especially Gatsby. There are quite a few literary devices, like an unreliable narrator, lots of symbolism and metaphors, so I kind of understand why it would be taught in a classroom, but I just don't care about anything in this book. Like really, who cares about a damn green light on a dock? I get that it's symbolic of all of Gatsby's hopes and dreams and all of that sort of thing, but it just doesn't work for me. And, you know, the book is a tragic and toxic love story. I mean, those two people in it, they're definitely not meant to be together, Gatsby and Daisy. But it doesn't really even build tension because it's this one-sided relationship. We know throughout the whole book that Daisy doesn't really like Gatsby in the way that he likes her, so it's really just a nothing book for me. Gatsby just flexes his wealth and Daisy doesn't care. And yeah, I guess it shows the underbelly of kind of the elites and how socioeconomic classes contrast. But there's really not enough of that to justify reading this book in school or otherwise. It kind of astounds me that this book has been made into a movie not once, but twice. And I get the argument that for kids, it's a good book to learn the literary devices, but I don't think the content of the book is like interesting enough for them to not just Google it on SparkNotes. I would probably say that Lord of the Flies is probably a better alternative with literary devices like symbolism, and I'll Give You the Sun is kind of a more modern YA book that I think would be a good alternative as well. But I'll just leave you with Gatsby, I'm not your sport, and I don't want to ride in your hydroplane. So just stop asking. And now, number 3. Romeo and Juliet. You all knew this was coming. The whole Shakespeare talk. Everybody talks about it when they talk about what they didn't like in school. But Romeo and Juliet in particular is one of his worst plays, at least how it's taught in schools traditionally. It gives kids an unrealistic expectation of how love should be, that you should be willing to commit suicide for someone you just met a few days ago. That you should be willing to like completely disregard your family's feelings just for that person. While obviously, yes, you should be able to make your own decisions regarding who you date, love, and all that. But they had only met a few days ago. The sheer amount of red flags that would arise after dating for a couple weeks. Here's my advice. Wait more than a few days before falling head over heels in love and disregarding your entire family for basically a random person. Okay, but I did say earlier that the way it's taught in schools traditionally makes it the worst play, but it would be much better if Romeo and Juliet was taught in the way that I feel Shakespeare actually wrote it initially. I personally think he wrote Romeo and Juliet as a comedy, not a tragedy. The fact that two people would be willing to throw their entire lives out after just meeting each other a few days ago is kind of funny. And evidenced by a couple of Shakespeare's other plays, he actually can be a really funny writer sometimes. So I wouldn't put it past him to make Romeo and Juliet like a parody of these outrageous love stories. For children, obviously, the language of Shakespeare's plays is far too difficult for any of them to comprehend effectively in a way that they could actually analyze the text. So most of the themes are completely over their heads, and the teacher basically has to like spark notes the plays themselves and their explanations. And like I said earlier, you can't really analyze something that you don't have a basic understanding of. So I could see why the whole comedy versus tragedy argument that I just brought up doesn't come up very often in school. I was an English major and I actually really love Shakespeare, but it is so much better in a college class where you learn how to read him and appreciate the language. Even still, there were plenty of English majors in my Shakespeare class who absolutely hated his plays. It's not everyone's cup of tea, and I get that. But it definitely does not make sense to teach him to younger kids and young adults. But if I were to teach any of his plays to young adults, it would probably be either Hamlet or maybe The Merchant of Venice. However, I probably still wouldn't teach it. Not to mention many of his plays are outdated theme-wise, such as like the patriarchal gender roles and things like that. So some of the violence that's in it, those aren't really things you want kids to kind of subliminally ingrain in their minds as like normal behavior. So overall, for all those reasons, I especially don't think Romeo and Juliet should be taught as a tragedy. If it is taught as a comedy, I think maybe it can help a little bit more. But in general, because of the language, it's just not worth it. It's really not worth it. Okay, at number 2, Great Expectations. Great Expectations was probably the book that when I asked people, they said it was the book that ruined their school reading experience the most. so many people told me that they just hated this book, that it just completely destroyed their reading experience and made them not want to read anything in school from then on. The book could have been half the length, even a fourth of the length. There are so many random subplots and side stories that make no sense to the plot. It's like there's a ton of filler episodes within the book. It does make sense though, because the book was written in newspapers, so it was released on a weekly basis, and Dickens was also paid per word. So he was kind of strongly incentivized to write as much as possible and to draw every little thing out. And Dickens loves to write about socioeconomic inequality and the drawbacks of each class. So there are some good themes there that he could have taken advantage of, but it just becomes drab after a long time for any reader in school because there's just so much and so many random subplots, and it's hard to sift through what he's actually trying to say because of all this filler. I also just don't like Pip. Like, he just sucks as a person and a character. I probably won't spout too much more about this book because, like, I don't even like talking about it. It's not even interesting to really analyze. And I also tried to read this again recently because I thought that, like, maybe my age would change my opinion, but no, it was still pretty bad. I mean, I would just avoid Dickens like the plague, except maybe like A Tale of Two Cities. Unless it's one of his abridged novels where all of that filler and fluff is cut out. And I just cannot imagine teaching this to a classroom of middle schoolers, high schoolers, elementary school. I mean, they won't read it in elementary school, it's too high level, but like even a high schooler, like that would just make me never want to read a book again in school. Okay, and at number 1, The Secret Life of Bees. And this is a good time to mention that these books aren't in any order. I don't hate The Secret Life of Bees the most. I really can't even rank these. Well, maybe I'd put Great Expectations number 1. That is probably my least favorite on this list. But they're kind of in a random order here. But I think The Secret Life of Bees is just boring. And similar to To Kill a Mockingbird, I think there's much better young adult novels that kids would be able to relate to and understand more, that would help them understand racial injustice and a lot of the issues that The Secret Life of Bees brings up. I actually recall falling asleep during class while we were reading this, which, as an English major, like, that was not common for me. I loved English class. That was my favorite class of the day. I look forward to it every single day. And I never sparked notes to book in all of high school. But Secret Life of Bees, I kind of had to, because, you know, I fell asleep and I didn't really want to read it on my own if I didn't like it. And, you know, I was a diehard, like, I'm never gonna spark notes anything. I'm gonna read every single book that we get. But you know, I do think if I reread it again now that I may like it, because I've seen some people recommend it on TikTok and YouTube and things like that. So maybe I should try it again. So maybe some of my arguments don't hold up here because I'm kind of going off what I remember from my young mind and how I felt about it. But I did feel like beekeeping and spirituality and everything else with the boat rights was just kind of plain boring to me. When Lily went into her past and all the racial themes that started to come up more, it became a bit more interesting, but I just think there are hundreds of books better than this that tackle the same topics. Kids in general should not be bored to read. Reading is amazing. The Secret Life of Bees and all the other books I've mentioned make people not want to read anymore, and that's really sad to me. Reading brings an experience that no other form of media can, especially to kids. And to address my question from earlier in the video, I do think that these books can cause kids to be so bored of books that they associate the feeling of reading with boredom and with a chore instead of like something that's genuinely fun. And now I feel like that's why we have a whole 2 generations of people who just completely avoid books. And I get that there's, you know, this huge attention war that TikTok and YouTube and everything are going over, and it's just more convenient for kids to grab their phones and to look at that, and the algorithms are built for that. But I think that if they understood how much books would help with that, that I think people would pursue them more. I mean, maybe people do know that already, but I don't think people know how different and how transcendent it can be to just pick up a book and get immersed in it. I mean, it's one of those activities that you kind of reach a flow state, like sports or writing or reading or any of those, or anything you enjoy really, but you don't really reach a flow state when you're scrolling on TikTok or even scrolling on YouTube, even though there's a lot of really good content on YouTube. I'll just have a little bit, I'll say honorable mentions on the side here, just other books that I think that suck that I read in school, just so that I kind of cover my bases here, because I know a lot of the comments are going to be filled with at least two of these. My third one, I don't think so. So I'll just say I really did not like The Scarlet Letter. I did not like Moby Dick. And I didn't like Speak. And I know a lot of people like Speak, but to me, it was just terribly written. And like many of these other books, I just think there were a lot of alternatives that were better. And with books in general, and with books that are assigned in school, like there are hundreds of thousands of books, so usually there's gonna be a better alternative. Like, there's no book that is so amazing that there's no better alternative for it. Even like the best books, I feel like there are probably some underground books that would be better than it. But thank you guys for watching this video so much. If you enjoyed, I would appreciate it if you subscribed. Once we reach 1,000 subscribers, this channel is gonna be monetized.